one thing we were talking about off air was, for me, this moment coupled with Jonestown, and I add Jonestown in there for people that don't know, because I think everybody looks at it as just a cult. Jim Jones was a communist, self-proclaimed, as we all are, I guess.
Yeah, I mean,
But
these guys were too.
yeah, but he's like, I'm going to be part of this communist revolution in San Francisco, and let's get all these different ethnicities together in this church, and I'm going to give you guys the two things that you really want, political power and salvation. I got it all. And we know how that ended. And then with this, for example, a lot of the organizing fell flat because of the Maoist push for for revolution. I don't know if they gave you any pamphlets to look at, but
oh yeah, I looked at all these pamphlets.
it's one of those things where you go, okay, you kind of got the people on your side to a point, and then they fall right off, because you're also talking about a part of the country where a lot of these people went to Vietnam or have family members that went to Vietnam.
Yeah.
And they don't really understand the nuances of the differences.
Well,
So on one hand, you're like, ooh, that's something that these cats left all that bourgeois comfort to go organize, to really get their hands dirty.
mm-hmm.
And then you go, but why poke the bear that is the Ku Klux Klan? If you don't do that, what happens? As you're working on this, is that going through your mind?
Oh yeah, there's this constant sort of discomfort at times with some of the rhetoric, and I have to keep going back to them and talking to them sort of as people and what sort of motivated them, and these were sensitive, smart people who cared about poor people. The other piece, right, is we're in this moment in the late 70s of high anxiety and inflation through the roof, and this sense that capitalism is sort of spinning out of control and perhaps going to fall apart. But in sort of the neoliberal efforts to sort of rein it, sort of get the hands back on the wheel, right, and drive it forward, is the way poor people have been left out. I mean, in a sense, no one was talking about poor people anymore. And, after LBJ, that becomes sort of, it's all middle class. And these guys were so committed to, the poorest people around them, and said, the establishment is never going to pay attention to these guys anymore. What choice do we have? And, I wouldn't make some of the choices they made, but I could understand, especially collectively, how they got there.
That kind of gets into my first question. How did the economic conditions of the late 70s, stagflation, deindustrialization, and the beginnings of neoliberalism, right? We're talking like the Volcker shock. You got the gas crisis, which you actually mentioned in the book. How does all this create a fertile ground for both leftist organizing and white supremacist violence? You write, as the 70s ground to a close, many in America felt their comfortable and optimistic post-World War II assumptions slipping beyond reach.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, there were the people who wanted to hold on and go back, and the people, that are at the center of my book, who saw this as an opportunity to create a rupture and start something new. And what you see, particularly with the Klansmen, for example, is this sense of a loss, not just of a way of life as it relates to race, but a way of life as it related to the land. That they were losing their rural, their ability to survive simply in a rural area, and they were having to piece together a livelihood in a way that their parents and their grandparents had been able to do more easily and more closely to the land. And so I think that's part of what's happening. But also, a lot of those guys were coming back from Vietnam, and they were saying, they send us half the world away to kill communists. How the heck are they going to allow communists to march through an American city? I mean,
Yeah,
there is
that was
a
part of the
certain
defense.
logic,
Yeah,
right?
that was part of their defense. They were like,
Yeah.
literally, that's one of the guys that shot was like, I was sent. I think that's what he says verbatim, isn't it? I
Yeah.
was sent half the way around the world to kill communists. Why would I not kill communists here
Yeah.
on American soil? You know, again, that kind of speaks to American education's role, especially during the McCarthy era, which many of these people grew up in.
Yeah.
It also kind of speaks to the prevalence of the power of the South and controlling books. I think we forget with education, a lot of smaller municipalities can't afford to buy books, so you get whatever like the big states next to you get. So when conservative Texas and Florida buy, when they say we're going to take out evolution and have an
Yeah.
asterisk there, or we're gonna change the narrative of slavery just a bit. It's
Yeah.
not just in that state; it affects a bunch of states next to it.
Yeah.
And to not understand, and this is a lot of people, even people that live in those coastal elites like you and I, Aaron. Even we probably have to learn a little bit about socialists and communists and labor rebellions domestically before the Depression. We have to learn about that in college or maybe just on our own. So I can't be too surprised that some of these people have no idea that there's been socialists involved in political movements domestically for some
Well,
time.
yeah, I mean, no idea, but also this sort of long, um, you think about J. Edgar Hoover and his propaganda machine and how successful it was
Mm,
for decades, and the impact it had. And here was a guy who was terrified of white activists and black activists coming together and forming a united front. Really, I mean, you look at Fred Hampton; that's what he was doing
yeah.
when he gets assassinated by the FBI and the Chicago police. You look at Martin Luther King Jr., and that's what's happening. You look at the Freedom Rides when the FBI stands by and takes notes when the local cops sort of give the Klan 15 minutes to beat the crap out of these folks. And he had totally successfully to the point where the judge in the final trial says, really, you can't even tease apart communism and equal rights at this point. Like, it is so tied together in the minds of the sort of white supremacists that if you're talking about equality, as far as they're concerned, you're talking about communism. And so, I mean, these people were real communists in their own minds, but the whole sort of cultural sense of what it meant was narrow and distorted, right?
Mhm. I would love to know if you were to sit down and ask, like, what is a communist to you? Like, don't say, and you can't say godless. Like, if you
Yeah.
can't say that, tell me what one is, because I want to know what you shooter, angry Klans person believes that's happening if these people organize labor. It is in literally your best interest to have power over your boss.
Well, I mean, and what was ended up being really interesting is a lot of these Klansmen weren't anti-union; they were just anti-integrated union, and did not want to share the power or share the benefits. One of the things that sort of gets to what we're talking about. So, of the 5 people killed, one was extremely talented African American woman who had been the president of Bennett College student body. There was a Anglo guy who'd been to Harvard Divinity School, to your point. There were, and then 2 doctors, Jewish doctors, and a Cuban PhD student in history. And but one of the Klansmen who shot at least 3 and possibly 4 of them said he had killed 4 black people. So
Wow.
for him, at that point, it didn't matter what the actual skin color was. What mattered was, what their affiliations were.